Hey everybody, welcome to the Eternal Card Breakdown. The set is out, so it is Empire of Glass time. There's a bunch of new cards out, a lot of cool stuff. We're going to start doing card reviews for Empire of Glass now, leading with, I believe, the legendary cards. So we're going to go ahead and get into that right now, and we're just going to talk about the legendaries, everything that can currently be craftable, whether or not it's good, what sort of like decks they might fit into. I guess if you're happy to see them in draft, although they are legendaries, so you probably have to see them in draft regardless because it is a brand new set. So you're gonna snap pick them anyways. All right, let's go over each of the cards in turn. We've I think talked about some of these before, but this is going to be part of a full set review as well. So we will go over each of these as we talk about each of them. We will just go over each one in turn. So starting with Kuzu Elevator. Non-Valkyrie units in your deck have Valkyrie Warp Charge, which, yeah, this is one that we have reviewed before. So 2-cost Relic. The Elevator is apparently a hotly contested item. The Oni Valkyrie in this set apparently do specifically refer to the Elevator and tell you that the Elevator is theirs. So, yeah, the Elevator is apparently important, and for Empire of Glass, it's going to be a big deal. In any case, this one gives all non-Valkyrie units in your deck Valkyrie Warp Charge, which means that if you have a Valkyrie, you can warp units off of your deck, which is very, very cheap effect for a 2-cost relic, considering that relics are a pretty big part of this set. Like if you're playing Valkyries and Sentinels together, relics are going to give you some extra synergy, so this gives you like a Valkyrie Sentinel relic kind of deck that you can build. It also is just like a decent cheap option if you're trying to play into like a 3-drop or a 4-drop, so you've got some good value there, and I think that it should be pretty easy to play this card and get quite a bit of value out of it consistently. Getting Warp is good for late game. It's rare that you can find this on a relic. The only other place that it currently is on is Godan, and also giving the units charge is very dangerous. So yeah, I think this card just kind of makes like Sentinels with a splash of Valkyries look really, really interesting, and should be a pretty powerful card in the format, provided you can get the sort of deck building aspect of it right. Explorer Sentinel relics always had like kind of like this same sort of synergy where the balance of the deck was really, really important, and it actually was kind of difficult to build the deck in the way that you wanted it to, but if you could actually get it going, then it was pretty powerful. And this is like way more powerful than any of the Explorer Sentinel relic stuff, which despite being pretty powerful, I think never made a meta deck. This is something where you can actually get just a ton of reach and value out of it, and if you're playing with like big Sentinels, you're pretty happy to see this, especially if you have cheap Valkyries to build into it. I think 1-cost Valkyrie, 2-cost Kuzu Elevators, the rest of the Sentinels, that's kind of where you want to be. Really, really good stuff. Daine Blitz, Flying Charge. Yeah, this card burns for 5 on turn. This card's just stupid strong. This one seems ridiculous to me. Like, the ultimate ability is quite good, and it also just deals 5 damage on the turn that it's played, which is always going to be a turn when your opponent doesn't have power up to kill it. So yeah, super strong card, very, very good, and the pay 3 to draw a weapon from your market is just icing on the cake that allows you to get extra value if the card is not destroyed on the turn that it's played. I think leaving a 5-3 on the board and forcing them to use a removal spell on it is really, really good if you are also dealing 5 damage to them. This is like Infernus, but it stays on the board. Yeah, very, very strong. Opum, the Gemblazer. Give one of your other Sentinels +5/+5 while you have Opum. It's 5-cost. Entomb, deal a damage to an enemy unit equal to the number of Sentinels in your void. So 5 for 5, 5 is already a good stat line. An additional +5/+5 is a ridiculous stat line. A lot of Sentinels already have Overwhelm or Endurance, which makes this really, really strong. And the Entomb ability kills units, which means that it gets value when it dies. This card is bonkers good. It is a very good reason to play aggro Sentinels or fiddle around with anything that is going to set Sentinels down. It is a very good reason to kill Sentinels as soon as you see them, because if you see an Opum the Gemblazer deck running, like, this card is just pushed. I think it is actually one of the stronger cards in the set. It just seems like it does a lot of different things. It does care about Sentinels, so if Sentinels are not good in general and Opum is like the only card that's pushing, then like maybe you don't get as much value out of this. This isn't like Sandstorm Titan level good where you get just an amazing amount of stats and also like it's just good on its own and everything, but it's still a very, very strong card, and if you're playing Sentinels, you're probably going to want this in red at 5. It's just way too strong for that. Ezuchi Daredevil, 6/6. When Iza takes damage on your turn, create and draw a random red card and a non-red card. He gets flying this turn. So if you can damage Iza, Iza gets to fly, and you get a red card and a non-red card. So you get 2 cards, you get a flyer, and that's probably enough to be pretty worth it if you can get it going. A 6-cost 6/6 has to take damage on your turn is a little tricky. There are some cards that will deal damage to it as soon as you play it. So you can play it, get a 6/6. It'll immediately have flying for the turn, which isn't a big deal, but you'll get 2 extra cards for playing it, which means that, yeah, that's a pretty good sort of type of deck to build around. Playing this card on its own is not that great an idea. You're not just going to play this like as a something to like smash in with a, I don't know, temper or something like that. But if you have the ability to deal the damage on the turn that Ezuchi is played, or if you have like a deck that is going to already like sort of support this kind of type of synergy, this might be a Sling of the Chi card. It has the right stats for it. Like it's a good 6-drop, it's 6/6, and that's like a stat line that really matters. But I would think that this card is not going to see a lot of play unless there are a lot of good ways to actually deal the damage, not only as part of a spell, but also on the turn it is played. Casualties of the Cause is not good enough for this. You need some really extra stuff to get it going. But if you can't get it going, the card advantage is very, very strong. So the question is, how fast can you do that? Is it turn 6 or is it turn 7? Because if it's turn 7, this card's probably going to die the turn it's played, and it's also a big red card that doesn't have amazing stats at the moment. Like, it's not aggressive compared to Opum, so it's just going to be hard to fill this slot. I think it's still really, really good. A lot of good card advantage associated with that. It's clearly going to be strong if you can get everything going, but yeah, otherwise, not so much. Silent and Sly says, can you do damage multiple times on your same turn to draw multiple cards? It says when Isa takes damage on your turn, so yes, you can do it multiple times, as many times as you like, provided you can trigger those damage options in multiple instances, which is not always easy. If it is a bunch of immediate on-turn triggers, like on-play triggers, I believe that Isa will only draw you 2 cards. So if you play the card and then like 3 different sources deal 1 damage to it as a result of you playing the card, like from a relic or something, or a unit, then that's not going to do anything for you. You'll just get 2 cards. But if it's damage and the damage is in like a sort of like individual setup, then yeah, that'll be good. Oh, my camera moved. That's rough. Or did I move? Either way. So yeah, Isa has got some interesting things going on. As long as it's a separate instance of damage, like basically like priority pass wise, then it should be fine. Honora Sorilla, Overwhelm, you and your other units are invulnerable to spell damage. Amplify 2, gain 5 health. I really like this card. Invulnerability to spell damage is super powerful. The stat line is really, really good, and the Amplify ability just stabilizes you. I think this card's very, very strong. It doesn't look it, which is generally not necessarily a sign that it's not a good card. Gaining that much health is just really, really important, and if you're playing in a ramp deck, this is a really strong card to include. So yeah, very, very good stuff. Send an Envoy, play a 5/5 Skyguard Sentinel Exhausted. Amplify, play a power card from your hand depleted to play an additional Sentinel Exhausted. So if you are somehow stocked up on power, you can then get extra Sentinels exhausted, but not at fast spell speed. This one looks pretty weak to me. I would say that it's probably, in comparison to the other like bomb cards that we've been talking about, not going to be something that's going to do a lot of work. You have to basically amplify this with power cards from your hand, which the ramp ability of it is really nice. Like if you are holding a handful of power, this is something where you get like a bunch of cards that will win you the game as long as you don't die this turn, and then you get a bunch of power that will win you the game if you don't die this turn. But in both of those situations, you're playing a 6-drop with a lot of specific setups, and then you aren't getting anything that can block or do anything along those lines. Combined with Endurance, this makes a lot better option. Like if you have a Infinite Hourglass out, you can just pop this and get some cards that can block flyers. That's really strong. But like if you can't unexhaust the Sentinels, there's just a lot of ifs here, basically. That is not an indication that you can't play this card. I would say that obviously the effect is strong enough to win you the game if you actually get everything going correctly. If you get the Infinite Hourglass, you don't die. If you get the Sentinels out early through ramp or something along those lines, if you get the power out early and you get like extra stuff to sort of follow up on that, this is clearly a power play, but it's just not a play that necessarily wins you the game, and it can be a play that loses you the game. So notable in that respect. The Great Kuzu, Fate, gain 3 health. All this health gain in time, really loving it. Red aggro is going to have a little bit of a harder time. This actually lowers the value of cards like Taheen Blitz by quite a bit if you have really, really good time life gain that people are actually playing. Ultimate, pay 10 to give the top 3 units of your deck +1 Strength and Destiny. Overall, this card's not terribly strong. The Fate ability is the main reason to play it. The Ultimate is actually not the main reason to play it. It's a 7-cost 7/7, so stat line's not great. The Ultimate ability is good, but basically is just like I am already winning, so now I have a way to like actually win. Basically, I'm just like playing a lot of good mid-range units. I can't quite get through on my opponent. I need a little bit more of an oomph to get over this. Well, because I'm playing just value units every turn, this is my mid-range finisher where I just pay the ultimate and then I'm good. So yeah, it's decent in that respect. It clearly doesn't belong in every deck, but that Fade ability of gaining 3 health can be really, really strong in control sets where you are basically only playing a couple of different units. You're playing a lot of card draw, you're playing a lot of second sights, you're playing a lot of that kind of stuff. So yeah, this card's like D tier. It's a little stronger than Send an Envoy in some respects because the effect is actually capable of keeping you alive, and the unit plays and has an impact on board the turn that you play it. But in both situations, you're doing a lot of work to get an ultimate that will not necessarily win the game for you. Those are things that you have to be a little bit more worried about in like a spiky deck. But in like a Big Timmy or Johnny deck, this is really, really fun. It is really, really huge. It has a really huge effect. It's really, really fun to play. And it also requires some build around me, which is good design in general. Like I really like the Great Kuzu. We'll be playing some decks with it for sure, and should be interesting to do some cool stuff with. Room First Constructor. 8 cost 10/10. You can play relics from your market. 8 cost 10/10 is probably more important than playing relics from your market, but hey, a little bit of extra card advantage on top of it, not a bad deal. You're not really getting advantage from playing like 1 and 0 drop market cards out of this, but amongst that you can play cards that are like the 3-drop relic that can get a Sentinel back from your market. So yeah, you know, if you're playing like a bunch of power, this card again does a lot of work. I think there's a lot of stuff in this sort of area of Sentinels that makes it very hard to run room, just because like we have just so little room per room. Like there's already a lot of big Sentinels and big cards that play a lot of all of your power. But like if you are greeding out completely, this card clearly does some neat work. I would say it's probably not a strong put into like any deck. It's one of your last crafts just because you're not like building a specific deck around it. But an 8 cost 10/10 is a really nice stat line. And if that stat line proves relevant for some reason, like if there's a big 9/9 or a big 8/8, or like it's just like it just matches up really well in trades against other 8-drops and that actually becomes a thing, then maybe this card sees more play. I think overall, it's the stat line that matters here and not the relic ability, but it's possible that there's some sort of infit combo with the relic ability as well, and if that's the case, then this card goes up in value because you can build it into a specific deck, and it's an 8 cost 10/10. Lord Steyre's Tower. The Valkyrie Warp ability means that this site does not actually do anything after it has completed its agenda, which is an interesting aspect of it. But when you play it, you can immediately advance the agenda twice, which is a lot of value if you're a Valkyrie warping it. You get a Steyre's Beckoning, a Curfew Enforcement, or an Ironclad Oath, and I believe you get to immediately do quite a bit of things. So like Steyre's Beckoning plays 2 blockers, Ironclad Oath gives another unit +4/+4 this turn, and then gives you an additional 2 armor for those blockers. That's probably going to be your standard 2, assuming that you aren't looking for an immediate Curfew Enforcement with a bunch of amplifies. The 2 Valkyrie also can play into the Curfew Enforcement if you have a bunch of power to then amplify off of the Valkyrie and give everything a permanent negative bonus. This site is very strong. Like, it defends itself super well. Rota Steyre's Adjutant is not like an amazing option, but if you get it on your turn, then as long as it doesn't die, you get a bunch of cards off of it, which is a big deal as well. Although I think your opponent's going to be spending a lot of cards trying to kill Lord Steyre's Tower. We played against this in draft. It was very rough. We did manage to get by it, but like that was only because we had a deck that was full of Valkyries, and it still managed to complete its agenda completely because both Curfew Enforcement and Steyre's Beckoning did an amazing job of defending it. I think this card's pretty strong for a site. It's one of the stronger sites that we've seen in a while, and yeah, it should be pretty powerful overall. Steyre's Beckoning, not like an amazing spell. Curfew Enforcement, not an amazing spell, but both of those cards are really, really strong with the tower, and the tower plays pretty well with Valkyrie. So I think this card's quite good in Valkyrie decks. Plea for Aid. Play a unit of your choice with cost 1 or less from your deck. Amplify, play 1 armor to increase that cost by 1. So in this case, basically you get to pick a card of your choice and you have to amplify to make the card more expensive, but you get to play that unit basically at slow spell speed, which can be fast spell speed in a green-yellow deck. So yeah, this is kind of interesting. If you have a bunch of power, then you can do some pretty cool like tricks where you can just pull out whatever unit you need to solve whatever problem you need. That means you can play creature control, which is a really fun thing to do. You just play relics and sentinels, and then you plea for aid for the sentinel that you need, and the sentinel does something stupid. I think like the main thing would be like with a trade agreement. You have a trade agreement out, you plea for aid, and now you can play something dumb like Room First Constructor at the end of your opponent's turn, and then play all your relics out from your market. Yeah, just stuff like that, where you're like, oh yeah, I'm just going to play Roa and amplify them because I have like 20 power, or I'm going to play something that breaks a relic, or I'm going to play something that pops an Aegis, something that blocks a flyer. So yeah, I think with Trade Agreement, this card looks really, really good. Without Trade Agreement, this card looks tricky, but like potentially manageable. Slow spell control is a little bit more interesting with this for sure. It's very expensive for what it's doing, so yeah, it's tricky. Oh, you have to pay the armor. For some reason I thought you had to gain the armor, but yeah, paying the armor does make it a lot harder to use. But it also means, for some reason I thought it was pay 1 cost. Okay, so pay armor, that is a more limited resource. We have to reevaluate that now. It always costs 4. You can get a lot of armor pretty easily with cards like Ironclad Oath and Styre's setup. So like Valkyrie can do this okay, but that does limit its inclusion in a lot of decks. There are not that many decks that can generate a ton of armor and still have that armor and 4 power up for plea for aid. There's some real potential there, but I actually think that that narrows my evaluation of the card, even though the cost is no longer in power and thus is no longer limited by that setup. Valkyrie plea for aid has some potential, but I just don't know that Valkyrie have a lot of like useful pieces of kit that they would really, really want. You can definitely get like the 5/3 charge. You can get silence Valkyries very easily. You can't usually get anything that destroys attachments, which is the thing. If you have a good selection of Valkyries, this card becomes a lot better, but I think like Valkyries, relic weapons, that's going to be sort of where it's at, and I'm not sure what armory deck is going to want this. Could be okay in an armory control list. Bit hard to play with, but another good card for like a trade agreement, like red, green, yellow armory option. So, Argo Iron Thorn. Ooh, I didn't know that there was another Iron Thorn, but I'm delighted. When Argo attacks, your attacking soldiers get double damage this turn. Summon, stun an enemy unit for each of your soldiers. Oh, so not related to Iron Thorn in any way, apart from being nicer and like a mirror version. Okay, so soldiers get double damage, stun an enemy unit for each of your soldiers when you summon it as a 3/3. That is a reasonable summon effect and a reasonable attack effect. Doesn't really... It will win the game in a draft. Like, this card will just kind of crush in a draft because you'll stun every one of your opponent's units and then all of your soldiers will get double damage on the next swing. In a ranked game, you'll stun a bunch of your units. Argo Iron Thorn will get torched or removed in some way, and then you still have a bunch of soldiers, which is nice. Could be a closer in a large soldier deck. Power level seems a little bit mediocre overall, but like big stuns can be very relevant, and that can be like, if there is a really strong soldier deck that just wants to top out at this, then this is not a bad way to do that. Titan Foundry. When you play a Sentinel, double its strength and health, and it gets Aegis. Titan Foundry costs less equal to the combined health of your Sentinels while it is in your hand. So, yeah, when you play a Sentinel, you get a huge bonus to it. It gets Aegis, which is also important, and it also costs less based on how many Sentinels you have out. This card seems kind of really good. It's not too hard to play cheap Sentinels overall. Like, there's a 3-cost 5/5 that discards cards, so if you have like some cheap Echo options, you can play that down and do some interesting stuff with that. Yeah, it's not very hard to give this a 0 cost, and then if you have another Sentinel in your hand, you immediately get a doubled up Sentinel with Aegis, which is going to be a problem. Even getting this to like 3 or 2, which is pretty likely since most Sentinels have 5 to 6 health, just means that your third Sentinel is going to be like a real kicker. I think that this is pretty powerful. The requirement for it is difficult, but it could lead to a really nice Sentinel mid-range deck that can just absolutely blow out your opponent. On the other hand, Sentinels do have a lot of things to do at large amounts of power, so it's possible that they don't play this, but I think that it is one of the more reasonable options for late-game Sentinels. So mid-range Sentinels have something good to look forward to in green. Daire Lee, 2/1. Once per turn, you can pay 1 and exhaust another soldier to give it +3/+3 this turn. Doesn't give it flying or evasion, so that effect is mediocre. The Amplify 5 ability transforms another unit into a 5/5 Dragon Simulacre with flying. So 2/1 with a useful ability is really nice. 1 costs with amplifies are generally pretty nice. Making dragons is pretty useful, and I think should make Daire Lee quite a bit better. She's definitely got some value out of that. But the main issue is that it is still a 2/1, and that ability to exhaust soldiers may not end up being all that useful to you if you aren't figuring out some way to ready the soldiers or like basically get them back. Like most soldiers are going to be attacking for around 3, so this sort of like puts all your eggs into Daire's basket, and then Daire is a pretty vulnerable option, and it costs an additional 1 to do it. So like I don't see you using that ability as often as you would expect. I think this is a bit of a niche pick, but overall that amplify ability does lead to some strength. So yeah, very, very fun in a draft environment because it's just so value. I think a 2/1 that gives value is not like a super aggressive option in most blue decks right now, because blue decks just don't have very good units most of the time, although soldiers may change that. Next up, Matriarch Zenday. Hey, we got an elf shaman. When a mandrake kills an enemy unit, transform it into a bomb. Bomb is a give a unit in +1 and reckless and draw a card. So bomb, notably not soothing, very interesting in that respect, but does basically turn things... Ooh, man, this is a hard card to evaluate. The summon ability gives one of your mandrakes +1 in flying, which is definitely not bad if you have mandrakes, but you can't really play this as a 2/2. It's kind of hard to trade with, which is useful. This one's very tricky to evaluate, but I think that with Regen Killer being an option, with the card being okay on blocks, with the card being a 2/2 for 2, which is just a reasonable stat line, and with the card having a flying ability on mandrakes, all of that seems like it's going to lead to some pretty interesting stuff. Overall, this card doesn't like win every game or anything along those lines. Bomb is still an expensive card to draw with, but it does give a unit reckless, which is nice. Bomb is not like going to like card advantage out because the shaman basically just trades for it, and that's, you know, just kind of free. And the mandrake getting flying is not like the most important thing either. So none of that is like just, this is a role filler, but it isn't a card that like pushes whatever deck you're building into across the finish line. It's just something that kind of helps fill that slot in the 2-drop slot. You could definitely replace it with other things and you probably wouldn't be too upset about it. And if the things are a bit more well statted, then you might have a better aggro deck as a result of it, which leads me to put it kind of in the C column. I think it's decent, but it's not going to be one of your first crafts. Replication Cell. Summon, sack a unit. Pay 4 to play a copy of the sacrificed unit. Use this ability only once per turn unless the unit is a Granadin. There's got to be an infinite combo with this, we have said already, and the copy ability is really, really cool. There's a lot of cool stuff you can do with it. I think that it's pretty interesting, and there's a lot of different ways to fiddle around with this. What's the infinite combo? So you can create an infinite number of units by Shardbinder counterfitting, and then I don't know what you do with that. Like, Shardbinder reduces the cost of this down to 1 for each one, so eventually it gets down to 0. No, it actually only goes down to 1 every time, because you have to have like 2 replication cells. Or double the effect somehow, which you can't do. There's some things, there's some ways to maybe make this work, but we'll see exactly what ends up being in here. Overall, I think this card is like not a card you want to heavily craft unless you know specifically what you want to do with it, and it's a Weird Johnny combo. If you have a Weird Johnny combo, great. If you want to like make a big copy of your best unit, then, and you just have this as a legendary, this is not a bad card to include. Like basically if you're running like kind of low on like good legendaries, or you have like some bomb that you really, really like but you don't have 4 copies of it, this is the kind of legendary where you get this card and you're just like, well, now I can just like replication sell my favorite unit and I can just play copies of it over and over again, and that way I get a bunch of power to my deck by duplicating stuff. So this is like an interesting solution for like a pauper player who doesn't have like a lot of money to craft stuff. That's something you can do. Thunderson Snooze. Killer regen, summon, stun, thunderous, and snooze. Give this endurance. It is so bonkers that it's basically unfair. I don't think we've checked to see if Infinite Hourglass is in the format yet, but there are a lot of different ways to give things endurance in the format, so it doesn't seem like a particularly bad deal. You can definitely ready this up for minimal cost, and also it's an 8/8 with killer and regen. I mean, the card's just kind of bonkers and should be very, very strong most of the way through. It readies on your next turn, so you get this pretty quickly, and it's only costs 5, and it's an 8/8. I think all of that like really leads to something that is very, very nasty. Also, just like a really fun card, well designed. Love the card design in general. Love the general character of the card. Very, very good stuff. Arak, Razorshaper. When one of your gunner dies, this is a 1/3 flying Valkyrie. Each unit and weapon in your hand gets +1 strength for one of your Gunnerdins dying. Summon, play 1/1 Razorbots with Deadly equal to Arak's strength. So 4 cost, plays 2 units immediately. If you can give it extra strength, it can do a lot more than that. When the Gunnerdins die, the unit weapon in your hand ability is minimal usefulness. So, like, basically, I think the Razorbots with Deadly is a nice touch. Like, certainly anything that plays a spider on top of itself is going to be a nice little bonus, but there are a lot of ways to clear these Razorbots out, and when you clear the Razorbots out, you may not get punished for it that badly. You might end up with like a very, very nasty aggro flyer or Valkyrie of some kind, so that could definitely be a problem, but the question is really like what is Arak synergizing with? And the answer is like, you know, there's a lot of different choices, but you do have to sort of, this is not going to fit in every deck is the main thing. It's something where you definitely get it into like decks that are playing like deal strength and damage to other units and also like buffing your own strength, but there's a lot of those cards don't have a lot of card value attached to them, so unless that particular style gets good very fast, this is one of your lower crafts overall. Diabolic Machinations. Draw 2 different cards from among the top 3 of your deck, then bottom the rest for 6. So you get to pick 2 cards, and you get to also discard 1 card, which is Honor of Claws, effectively. Except Honor of Claws, I think, makes you discard 2. Oh man, I don't remember. In any case, Amplify, take 1 damage up to your health to look at 1 more card. So you can amplify as much as you like to make sure that you get very specific cards, which is a big deal, actually. Amplifying for damage is useful for a lot of different reasons, amongst other stuff. I think the really simple thing to do here would be Xenon deck. You are just playing yourself to like 8, you Diabolic Machinations, you go down to 1, because you can, and then you Vicious Rejuvenation. Trade health with your opponent. This is the only card that currently will deal you exactly enough damage to take you to 1 every single time, so that is something to pay attention to because that means it's a combo piece. This has a lot of danger attached to it. It's a good thing that it's a 6-cost card because, like, I mean, Celestial Omen has never been all that good, so like this is something where you get to pick 2 different cards out of your deck that are like really, really important, and you can potentially just like completely wreck your health total to look at more than half of your deck, get a ton of value out of it. I think that is potentially really strong. It's a clear combo piece, and there is a way to make slow spells fast now, so this is something where you can make some really interesting combos happen if you're playing Diabolic Machinations. As a card that just draws 2 cards and gives you, like, you know, the better choice of 3, that's really not a bad thing for Shadow to have. I don't think that they would necessarily not want to play this card, so, like, you know, in a regular old deck, this is like C, D tier. In any combo deck, this is clearly like, you know, a pretty key piece, so you would craft it for that particular reason. Snappix, Deathstalker. Lifesteal regen. When you amplify, it gets +2 strength for each amplify. When it regenerates, it deals its health and damage to the enemy player. So put some pressure on your opponent, but only if you can amplify. If you can amplify, then this card gets pretty scary pretty fast. It is a little bit sticky, so playing it on turn 6 and then playing an amplify on turn 7 it seems very likely to deal quite a bit of damage to your opponent's face because you're just going to be attacking with like an 8/4 regen. Your opponent's going to have to do something about it, but also if it gets death struck, then it's dead, and none of the text on it matters. So I'm more or less like, this is like C column for me. I think it's got some potential, but it is a 6-cost unit, and like, you know, it's only okay. Does combo with Diabolic Machinations. You can get all of that health back, so just like take yourself to 1 or 5 or some safe amount of damage, then attack with Snappix. assuming your opponent is just empty, and then you can like combo them out, and that is clearly just like a 1-2 punch that's going to be very, very strong. But like if you're playing this card just like as an amplified bonus, you have to get a lot of things going correctly for this to really, really function. I think it's a low-end craft. Like, you know, it doesn't matter as much as Machinations in the Machinations deck, but it is a nice little addition to the Machinations deck. Krull, Zumuk, Occultist. Zumuk is not a faction we are familiar with yet. I am very curious to see what a Zumuk is. When Krull damages a player, play a unit from their void with cost less than or equal to the damage dealt. So you get to hit opponents and then steal their stuff. The Fate ability is that it deals damage to you equal to your remaining power. So when you draw it, it will hurt you for however much power you have. And then it will play a unit from your void with cost less than or equal to the damage dealt. So if you draw this card and you just have 5 power, you get to play a 5-cost card from your void, but you take some hits for it. If you draw this card on your initial hand, it deals no damage to you, which is a nice bonus. If you draw this card on turn 1 or 2 or 3 and you just don't have anything in your void, then it starts punishing you. So yeah, it's a bit of a mixed bag, but the drawback is less powerful, less disadvantageous than you would expect. Notably, like, the card gets to steal from your opponent's void, which is a nice thing if you just have like something like Sling of the Chi going on and you're like throwing Overwhelm on it or Lifesteal or other stuff like that. Like, just, yeah, you know, there's some neat things that you can play around with that ability. And then, like, you know, it doesn't hurt you if it's in your opening hand, although you probably want to discard it out of your opening hand. And it doesn't hurt you on turn 1 or 2 all that badly. Like, you know, a little bit of damage is fine. Once you're in like turn 3 or 4, if you're not putting units into your void that you want to play back and Krull is getting drawn, then it really starts to make a difference in what your win rate is, because it's going to put you low for aggro decks, and that's going to be a problem. However, if you're taking 2 from a Krull to like play a 2-drop that blocks an aggro card or sacrifices to gain you health or like trades or does anything that actually like helps stem the flow of aggro, free cards are nothing to scoff at, and summon abilities are pretty strong too. So this could be a counter aggro card in that respect, even though it is dealing damage to you. So yeah, I think this is pretty strong. Overall, it seems like it does a lot of different things. It is effective on both your void and your opponent's void, which is pretty relevant. And it's a Fate ability, and Fate abilities are just generally pretty good. So yeah, like, you can definitely play around with this quite a bit. It has the chance of just murdering you, and that is not always a good feeling. But, I mean, this card looks like it could potentially be played in a lot of different decks that are just fiddling around with like different void shenanigans or just sacrifice shenanigans and the want to play more cards per turn. Goldplate Goliath, Decay, double damage, endurance. Summon, you gain 3 health for each of your exhausted units. Entomb, draw each other sentinel from your void. So when you play it, it gives you a bunch of health. It costs 10, so it's not a huge deal. You just swing in for a bunch, plop it down, get a bunch of health. Now you have a Decay, double damage, endurance as well, and maybe your stuff had, well, your stuff didn't have endurance, but yeah, maybe your stuff is like able to ready at the end of turn as well if it has endurance. The Entomb ability gives you just a ton of cards. So yeah, this is kind of like a closer, but it's a closer in the way that a lot of 10 drops in time are closers, which is that they gain you a bunch of health for a particular thing that you should be doing that should be killing them already, and then if you haven't killed them already, then you're now in a much better position, but it cost you 10. So, like, yeah, this is not an incredibly important craft early on. It's just something really, really fun to pull out of a market or slam down out of, like, a random card. It's a great 10-drop to hit off of all of the, like, random effects that play, you know, cards of particular types. Like, if you're celebrating for 10, this is the card you want to hit. If you're attacking for a bunch now, and you basically just want to swing in with a bunch of units, you can now pay 10 for a celebration or pay 11 for a celebration, and you'll either hit Goldplate Goliath or you'll hit another 10-drop, Scourge of Froststone, which shuts down spells. That's not that important, but you might actually hit a Sentinel that gives you a huge amount of health for every unit in your void. So, like, both of those options are like really, really strong, and hitting both of those Sentinels means that you have a higher chance of doing that on a turn 11 with a celebration, which is the kind of thing that matters when you're playing Sentinels, because Sentinels will give you a bunch of maximum power that you may not actually need to close the game out. Sentinels are super fun, basically, and this is a super fun Sentinel. Blow the Dam. Double damage lifesteal. Deals 0 damage to the enemy player. Discard a random card from your market to increase the damage by 1. So the more cards in your market, the more you can blow the dam for. This card takes a while to get up to the amount of damage that you really want it to do, but 10 damage with lifesteal is not bad. So if you are not playing any cards out of your market and you blow the dam, then this is okay. 8 for 10, gain 10. That's pretty reasonable. It is directly to the enemy player. It's not flexible at all. If you have a way to put a bunch of cards into your market, you can make this do more. But the problem is that it doesn't scale particularly well. There's not a lot of ways to increase the spell damage of it, like not in Stone Scar anyways. Getting extra cards in your market is good, but like there aren't that many cards in red and purple that do this specifically. You might have to go into like green, or a lot of the colors that I've seen have not really done this yet. It's possible that I'm missing some solid commons or uncommons that are like just get 2 random. I'm sure that I am missing a get 2 random shadow and a get 2 random fire card in your market. But like the question is, are those cards good? And even if those cards are good, Blow the Dam seems like one of the lowest value crafts in the current format, just because there are other better things to do, and one of them is a Flame Blast that does even more damage for even more value. Doesn't do lifesteal, but I mean, if you're killing your opponent, it doesn't really matter if you're gaining life. Battlemaster Cataxius. 2 cost, 2/3, Minotaur. Good stat line. Argenport colors, so a little hard to play the 2/3, but that's fine. When you play a relic, Cataxius and each weapon in your deck get its battle skills, and +1/+1 total. So this is one of the stronger Navani style war cries that we have seen. It does give every weapon in your deck an additional set of battle skills, which is really, really nice for that kind of like Argenport ridiculousness. And then the Valkyrie Warp ability gives you a bunch of influence, which is whatever. So plays well with Valkyries, plays well with relic weapons. Valkyries play well with relic weapons already. I see this card as being a pretty likely high craft if you are the type of player who builds armory. This is something that clearly fits pretty well in those types of decks. It is not an immediate effect like Rakano Artisan and a lot of the other stuff that you might be playing in these types of decks. And if the removal gets really, really heavy and you just don't end up wanting to play Battlemaster Cataxius, that can actually happen. You might just end up with like more relic weapons than like units. There are reasons that this card might not get played. But if you are playing like, you know, a throne deck with a bunch of like Valkyrie Enforcers because you want to silence things, and like I believe there are some Valkyries that specifically help out relic weapons now, there are reasons to play this for the warp, and then also the relic ability is like the main thing. So I think that it's got enough value to really be important. Might be nice to see, like, I wonder if we'll see Valkyrie weapons in the next set. That seems like something that might be very likely. Cast Iron Furnace. Deal 1 damage to the enemy player, then if you have 5 or more factionless cards in your void, play a 5/5 dragon Simulacre with flying. This isn't going to be an important craft unless you really like colorless decks. If you really like colorless decks, then this is the most important craft. That's really all there is to it. Speaking Circle, another one for the colorless decks, but also just a generally good site that is also colorless. The enemy player can't have a site. The Queen of Glass's agenda is that you choose between 3 options that cost 3 or less 3 times to set her agenda. So she gets to play any number of different things. The Queen of Glass herself is a regen unblockable with your other units are awakened and cannot die while you have... Let's go ahead and switch over here so we can see it. While you have the Queen of Glass. So awakened is not a particular like thing. It's going to be a keyword, I guess, to mark that something can't die, but there are no other awakened cards in the set, so this is something that the Queen of Glass specifically does. Awaken might come back in a future set. I would not be surprised. But in any case, 7/7 regen unblockable, so that's a good thing to work towards, certainly. Unblockable regen is very, very hard to deal with, and your other units can't die is pretty important as well. If you can get an Aegis on that thing, great. The enemy player can't have a site. That's a useful, nice little function. And if you can reduce the cost of this card with Tempting Offer or something along those lines, the site itself is pretty good as well. I think Discover is just a really powerful mechanic. It is possible that Speaking Circle is too random to really help you, but it has a chunky amount of health, it has a good finisher on the top, and it's very likely going to be able to defend itself or get card advantage for being played. Whether or not that's worth 6 to you is going to be one of the most difficult questions in this set to answer. I think only play can really tell if the Speaking Circle is gross and overpowered or just kind of okay, but I think there are a lot of different colored decks that are going to be happy to play the Speaking Circle and happy to get a lot of value out of it. So colorless decks, ahoy! This is by far the strongest colorless card that has been printed, and I'm including that power that generates 5/5s. And yeah, it seems like something that can definitely play in a lot of different decks. It is appropriately costed, but it might even be too powerful. It might need to get taken down in health, might need to get taken up in cost. We will see, depending on like just basically the quality of the cards that you are discovering is how good the Speaking Circle ends up being. So. But I think there's a lot of stuff like that, and in this set in particular, where there's a lot of like influence-heavy cards that are pretty hard to play, this is something where you can get a lot of bang for your buck out of that Discover. All right, that's all the legendaries from the current set. We will be back with more. We'll probably review the rares next, but at the very least wanted to get like a little crafting sort of like evaluation out. So a lot of the upfront cards were definitely the stronger ones to craft. I think that like going for like the big Valkyries and the sort of things that are simpler is usually the best way to go early on. But if you have a particular idea and you want to support it, there are clearly a lot of legendaries that help with that as well. There are build around me's for armory, there are build around me's for combo, there are build around me's for a lot of interesting like weird lifesteal swap, like just nonsense. I think there's some pretty interesting things to be looking for in the current set, and this is something that we're definitely looking forward to exploring in upcoming Eternal Brews. All right, so that's it for the Legendary Guide. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you again with a new brew or the Rare Guide next. Cheers.